The first T-72 took the Hellfire through the turret ring at a range of 2,400 meters, and the top of the tank came off the bottom of the tank in a single piece, the way a lid comes off a jar, and the lid traveled approximately 40 feet into the air before it stopped traveling up and started traveling down. The second T-72, 800 meters behind the first, was still in the process of traversing its main gun toward the helicopter when the second Hellfire arrived through its left side and went out through its right side and took most of the crew compartment with it on the way through. The third tank tried to back up. The fourth tank tried to turn around. Neither of them made it. 11 minutes after the wheels of the Apache had left the FOB pad at Al-Tanf, 11 minutes after a 31-year-old Chief Warrant Officer 2 from Duluth, Minnesota had climbed into a helicopter she was not authorized to take into combat and lifted off without a co-pilot in the front seat. Four Russian-built main battle tanks belonging to the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant were burning in a line across 2 kilometers of desert, 1,800 meters from Syrian Democratic Forces, blocking position that, 14 minutes earlier, had been approximately 14 minutes from being overrun. The helicopter came back with 14% fuel. She had 1 Hellfire left on the rail. She did not use it. My name is Hatch Holloway. Pour yourself something. Sit down. This one is going to take a while, and the part you think is the story is not the story, and the part that is the story did not happen in the air. It happened 6 months earlier, in a briefing tent, in front of 14 warrant officers, when a man named Roman Kallenbach looked at her across a folding table and told her, in a voice that was perfectly clear and perfectly carrying, that she flew helicopters to check the aircraft, not to kill things. I am going to tell you what he said. I am going to tell you what she did. I am going to tell you what he did. 18 hours after she pulled 4 Hellfires off a rail and put 4 tanks into the dirt and saved his life without ever once mentioning that she was saving his life. And I am going to tell you about an email in December that he has sent her every year for the last 8 years that is exactly 6 words long, and that she has answered every year for the last 8 years with exactly 1. That is the story. The tanks are not the story. The tanks are the price of admission. Her name is Britta Sjögren. The first name is Swedish. The last name is Swedish. She is, in the strictly genealogical sense, half Swedish and half Norwegian and 1/8 Finnish, but in the practical sense in which these distinctions are made in Duluth, Minnesota, where she was born on the 22nd of February, 1986, she is just Scandinavian, which is what Duluth calls everybody whose great-grandparents got off the boat in 2 harbors between 1880 and 1910 and never quite got around to going any farther west. Her father is Lars Sjögren, who is now 78 years old and who lives, with his wife Karen, in the same 2-story house on East 8th Street in Duluth that he bought in 1979 with a VA loan after he separated from the United States Marine Corps as a captain at the age of 32. Lars Sjögren flew F-4 Phantoms with VMFA 115, the Silver Eagles, out of Da Nang and later Nam Phuong, between September of 1971 and the rolling withdrawal of Marine fixed-wing aviation from Southeast Asia in 1973. He flew, by the count in his own logbook, which Britta has seen exactly twice in her life, both times without her father's knowledge, 147 combat sorties. He flew close air support over Quang Tri during the Easter Offensive in the spring of 1972. He flew, on the 2nd of May, 1972, a sortie during which his backseater, a first lieutenant named Devin Whitaker out of Mobile, Alabama, was killed by a fragment from a surface-to-air missile that detonated approximately 14 feet behind the aircraft, and which Lars Sjögren brought back to Da Nang on one engine with the body of his backseater still strapped into the rear cockpit. Because there had been nothing else to do with the body, and because the body had been, until 40 minutes earlier, his friend. Lars Sjogren has never talked about Vietnam. He has never talked about it to his wife. He has never talked about it to his daughter. He has never talked about it to the other Marine pilots from VMFA 115 who used to come through Duluth in the 80s and 90s on their way to fishing trips on Lake Vermilion, and who would sit on the back porch of the house on East 8th Street drinking Ham's beer with Lars and not talking about Vietnam, in the specific and deliberate way that men who have agreed not to talk about something do not talk about it together. Britta, as a child, watching them through the kitchen window from inside the house, where her mother was making dinner and pretending she did not also notice the not talking, understood, by approximately the age of 9, that there was a thing her father carried that he was not going to put down, and that he was not going to describe, and that the not describing was itself the way he carried it. She did not ask him about it. She has never asked him about it. She has, in 40 years of being his daughter, learned everything she knows about her father's war from 2 sources, which are the logbook she has seen twice without his knowledge and the framed photograph of First Lieutenant Devin Whitaker that hangs in the hallway of the house on East 8th Street, between the bathroom door and the door to the bedroom that used to be Britta's bedroom and that is now a sewing room, and that has hung there, in the same frame, in the same position on the wall, for as long as Britta can remember. The photograph is a standard Marine Corps officer portrait. Devin Whitaker is 23 years old in the photograph. He is wearing service alphas. He is smiling, slightly, the way a lieutenant smiles in an official photograph when the photographer has told him to smile, but he does not quite want to. Britta, as a child, asked her father once who the man in the photograph was. She was 7. Her father was 45. He was standing in the hallway with a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked at the photograph. He looked at her. He said, in a voice that she remembers, today, with absolute clarity, for words, "That is my friend." She said, "Where is he?" He said, "He is in the photograph." She did not understand, at 7, what that answer meant. She understood, by approximately 12, what it meant. She did not ask again. She decided to fly helicopters when she was 15. The decision was not made in conversation with her father. The decision was not made in conversation with anyone. She made it on a Tuesday afternoon in October of 2001, sitting in her bedroom in the house on East 8th Street, for weeks after the 11th of September, watching, on a small television set that her parents had given her for her 13th birthday, a CNN segment about Army aviation in Afghanistan, in which an AH-64 Apache had been shown, in grainy gun camera footage, engaging a target somewhere in the Shai-Kot Valley. The footage was, by the standards of what would later become available, primitive. The audio had been muted. The helicopter, in the footage, had been visible only as a steady crosshair and a green-tinted infrared image of a small structure approximately a kilometer away. The crosshair had held perfectly still for approximately 3 seconds. A small white flash had appeared on the structure. The structure had ceased to be a structure. Britta Sjogren, 15 years old, sitting on the edge of her bed, had said, out loud, to nobody, the sentence that she would later identify, in conversation with a Marine pilot named Lars Sjogren, on her last night in Duluth before she shipped to basic combat training at Fort Jackson on the 12th of August, 2005, as the sentence that had organized the next 20 years of her life. She had said, "I want to be the crosshair." She did not tell her father about the decision for almost 4 years. She told him on the back porch of the house on East 8th Street, on the evening of the 11th of August, 2005, the night before she shipped. He was 61 years old. He was drinking a Hams. She was 19. She was drinking a Coke. She had already enlisted. She had already signed for the Aviation Warrant Officer Flight Training Program. contingent on completion of basic and advanced individual training and selection for the program, which was, in 2005, the only path by which an 18-year-old high school graduate without a college degree could become an Army aviator. She had not told him she had signed. She had not told her mother she had signed. She told him that night on the back porch, in approximately the same order I am telling you now. He listened. He did not interrupt. He drank his hams. When she was finished, he was quiet for approximately 40 seconds. He looked out at the backyard, where the maple tree he had planted in 1981 was, in August of 2005, approximately 30 feet tall. He took a sip of his beer. He set the beer down on the wooden arm of the lawn chair he was sitting in. He said, finally, the longest sentence she had heard him say about the military in the 19 years she had been alive. He said, Britta, the aircraft will try to kill you, and the enemy will try to kill you, and the weather will try to kill you, and the maintenance will try to kill you, and most days you will be more afraid of the maintenance than of the enemy, and that fear will be correct. The day you stop being afraid of the maintenance is the day the maintenance kills you. Be afraid of the maintenance. Be respectful of the enemy. Be honest with the weather. And remember, every time you walk out to the aircraft, that the aircraft does not care who you are, and the aircraft does not care that your father flew Phantoms, and the aircraft does not care that you are a woman, and the aircraft does not care that you are 19. The aircraft cares about one thing, which is whether you are going to fly it correctly. Fly it correctly. That is all I have to tell you. I love you. Go to bed. She went to bed. She shipped the next morning. He drove her to the airport. He did not cry. She did not cry. Her mother cried. Her mother is allowed to cry. That is the arrangement in the Sjogren family. Karen handles the feelings. Lars handles the not handling of the feelings. Britta, by the age of 19, had already taken her father's side of the arrangement, and she has been on her father's side of it ever since. I want to tell you about Apache pilots, briefly, because if you do not understand what an Apache pilot is, you will not understand what a maintenance test pilot is, and you will not understand why CW4 Roman Kallenbach's sentence in the briefing tent in eastern Syria in June of 2017 was the sentence it was. The AH-64D Apache longbow, which is the variant British Sjogren was qualified on in 2017, and which is, with subsequent modifications, the variant the United States Army still flies today as the AH-64E, is a two-crew attack helicopter. It carries a pilot in the back seat and a co-pilot gunner in the front seat. The back seat pilot flies the aircraft. The front seat pilot, who is called the CPG, operates the targeting system, which is called the TADS, and operates the weapons, which on the AH-64D include a 30mm M230 chain gun under the chin of the aircraft, 70mm Hydra rockets and pods on the wing pylons, and Hellfire missiles, also on the wing pylons. The Hellfire is the weapon that the Apache is famous for. The Hellfire is the weapon that kills tanks. The AGM-114K, which is the variant British Sjogren had loaded on the rails of her aircraft on the afternoon of the 14th of December, 2017, is a laser-guided semi-active homing missile with a tandem-shaped charge warhead designed specifically to defeat the explosive reactive armor packages that the Soviet Union began fitting to T-72 main battle tanks in the late 1980s, and that the Syrian Arab Army was still fitting to its T-72s in 2017, and that the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant inherited, fully fitted, when it captured a tank battalion's worth of equipment from a collapsing Syrian regime brigade west of Abu Kamal on the 7th of December, 2017. The Apache is designed to be flown by two pilots. The Apache can be flown by one pilot. The Apache cannot, in normal operations, be flown effectively in combat by one pilot, because the workload of flying the aircraft, navigating, communicating with ground units, and operating the targeting and weapons systems simultaneously is, in the assessment of every Army aviation training document published in the last 40 years, beyond the cognitive capacity of a single human being under combat conditions. There is, however, an exception. The exception is the maintenance test pilot. The MTP is a fully qualified Apache pilot who has, in addition to combat qualification, completed an additional course of training that qualifies the MTP to fly the aircraft solo from the back seat. In order to test the airframe and the systems after maintenance has been performed on the aircraft. The MTP is, by training and certification, the only category of Apache pilot authorized to fly the aircraft solo in any circumstance other than the loss of the front seat crew member in flight. In MTP mode, the back seat pilot can, with significant additional workload, operate the weapons systems directly from the back seat, using a reduced functionality version of the TADS interface that is built into the back seat instrument panel for emergency use. An MTP is not a combat pilot. An MTP is a combat pilot plus. An MTP is a combat pilot who has taken on, voluntarily, the additional responsibility of being the pilot who proves the aircraft is safe to fly before any other pilot is willing to take it up. The MTP knows every individual aircraft in the company better than the pilots who fly it daily, because the MTP is the pilot who has flown that aircraft after every component replacement, after every avionics update, after every hard landing, after every overspeed event, after every maintenance action that requires post-action verification. The MTP, in the unofficial taxonomy of every Army aviation unit that has ever existed, is the most technically competent pilot in the company. The MTP is also, in the same unofficial taxonomy, the pilot who flies the least combat. Because the MTP is too valuable to risk. Because the MTP, if killed in combat, takes with her the institutional knowledge of every airframe in the company. Because the MTP, in the structure that the Army has built around the position, is supposed to be the person who keeps everyone else alive by keeping the aircraft alive. British Shogren was the MTP for Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 3rd Aviation Regiment, 12th Combat Aviation Brigade, from the moment she completed her MTP qualification at Fort Rucker, Alabama, in March of 2016, until her promotion to CW3 and rotation out of the company in 2019. She had been an MTP for 21 months when her unit deployed to Syria in June of 2017. She had been in country at FOB Al-Tanf in southeastern Syria for 48 hours when Captain Roman Kallenbach, who was the company commander of Alpha Company and who was, in his own assessment, the most experienced combat Apache pilot in the battalion, held his first all-pilots briefing in the briefing tent. I am going to tell you about Roman Kallenbach now. I am going to tell you about him for the same reason I told you about Wyatt Crail in the last story I told. I am going to tell you about him because if you think the man who put down British Shogren in the briefing tent on the evening of the 18th of June, 2017, in front of 14 of her fellow warrant officers, was a piece of subhuman trash, you are going to misunderstand the entire rest of the story. He was, on that night, behaving in a way that was beneath him. He had been behaving, for approximately the previous 18 months, in a way that was beneath him. He had reasons for what he was doing. The reasons were not good reasons. They were also not the reasons of a bad man. They were the reasons of a man who had been a good man, and who was going to become a good man again, and who had, in the middle period of his career, lost track of which kind of man he was. The story I am about to tell you is the story of how he found his way back. He found his way back because British Shogren killed 4 tanks in 11 minutes and did not mention it. We are going to get there. But first I have to tell you who he was on the night of the briefing. Roman Wendell Callenbach was born on the 3rd of September, 1974, in Burlington, Vermont, the only son of a high school civics teacher named Edward Callenbach and a registered nurse named Margaret Callenbach, née Whitlock. He grew up in a 3-bedroom farmhouse on a 5-acre property in the town of Hinesburg, Vermont, 12 miles south of Burlington, in a household in which the family ate dinner together every night at 6:30, in which the television was turned off during dinner, in which his father read aloud from the Burlington Free Press editorial page on Sunday mornings and required his son to discuss the editorial with him afterward, and in which his mother, when he came home with a B on his report card in the 7th grade, sat him down at the kitchen table and explained to him, in the gentle but specific way that registered nurses explain things to 7th graders, that a B was acceptable, but that a B was not the same as an A, and that he was, in her professional medical assessment of his cognitive capacity, capable of an A. He got the A. He has been getting the A, in one form or another, for the last 50 years. He attended the University of Vermont on an Army ROTC scholarship from 1992 to 1996. He commissioned as a second lieutenant of aviation in May of 1996. He completed initial entry rotary wing training at Fort Rucker, Alabama, in October of 1997. He was qualified as an Apache pilot, H-64A variant, in March of 1998. He deployed to Bosnia in 1999. He deployed to Kosovo in 2000. He was in his second year of company command of a line aviation company at Fort Hood, Texas, when the planes hit the towers on the 11th of September, 2001, and he was in Afghanistan, flying Apaches in support of Operation Anaconda, by the 2nd of March, 2002, which was the opening day of the Battle of the Shawkat Valley, and which was the operation that 15-year-old British Sjogren had, for months later, watched grainy footage of on the small television set in her bedroom in Duluth, Minnesota. There is a non-trivial possibility, although it cannot be proved, that the Apache in the gun camera footage that organized British Sjogren's life was an Apache flown by Roman Callenbach. I am not going to assert that it was. I am going to tell you that it could have been, and that the two of them, 15 years later, sitting across a folding table in a briefing tent at FOB Al-Tanf, did not know it could have been, and that even if they had known, the knowledge would not have changed what was about to happen between them, because what was about to happen between them was the working out of two things that had been organizing both of their lives, in opposite directions, for the previous 15 years, and that were about to meet in a briefing tent and not recognize each other. He deployed to Iraq in 2004. He deployed to Iraq again in 2006. He deployed to Afghanistan in 2009. He deployed to Afghanistan again in 2011. He was promoted to Chief Warrant Officer 3 after he voluntarily transferred from the commissioned officer ranks to the warrant officer track in 2008, which was an unusual move at the time and which was made by Roman Callenbach for reasons that are documented in his official Army personnel file as career flexibility and operational focus, but which were, by his own later account to me in a phone call in 2024 from his home in Vermont, the realization, somewhere between the second Iraq deployment and the first Afghanistan deployment, that I had become an officer who wanted to fly more than he wanted to command, and that the Army was going to keep pulling me out of the cockpit and putting me behind a desk if I stayed in the commissioned ranks, and that the only way to stay in the cockpit for the rest of my career was to take the warrant. I took the warrant. I have never regretted it. I regret, sometimes, the man I was for about 3 years after I took it, but I do not regret the decision itself. He was promoted to CW4 in 2014. By the summer of 2017, when his battalion deployed to Syria, he was 42 years old. He had logged approximately 3,400 hours in Apaches. He had flown in 5 combat deployments, and he had, by every external measure, become exactly the kind of senior Apache pilot the Army wanted him to be, which was a tactically aggressive, technically competent, deeply experienced combat aviator who could be trusted with the most difficult missions in the most difficult theaters. He had also, somewhere between his second and third Afghanistan deployments, developed a quiet but specific contempt for pilots who he believed had not earned their place in the cockpit. This contempt was not racial. It was not, in any of the cases his fellow pilots could later document, directed at any individual pilot for any individual reason that had to do with that pilot's identity. It was directed at what Kallenbach, in his own internal taxonomy, called the back end of the pipeline, which was his term for pilots who had come into the Army aviation community after the post-9/11 surge had relaxed, in his assessment, the selection standards that had been in place when he had gone through Fort Rucker in 1996. He believed, by 2015, that the Army was producing Apache pilots who were not as good as the Apache pilots the Army had produced when he was a young pilot. He believed that the difference showed up in combat. He believed that the difference cost lives. He had, by his own count, lost 2 friends in Apaches in Afghanistan between 2011 and 2014, both in incidents that he believed, fairly or unfairly, could have been prevented by better airmanship, and he had concluded, by approximately 2015, that it was his personal responsibility, as a senior pilot, to hold the line against what he saw as the gradual softening of the Apache community. He held the line by being hard on junior pilots. He held the line by being especially hard on junior pilots who came to him from non-traditional pipelines. He held the line by being specifically hard on the small but growing number of female pilots who had begun arriving in Apache units in the years after 2013, when the Army had formally opened all aviation positions to women, even though those positions had technically been open since the 1970s in the case of helicopter pilots. He did not believe, in any conscious or articulated way, that women could not fly Apaches. He believed, in a way that he had never quite articulated even to himself, that the Army's institutional enthusiasm for putting women into Apache cockpits was a symptom of the same softening that was producing pilots he did not trust, and he had decided, without ever quite deciding, to be the corrective. He had decided to be the senior pilot who did not give the female pilots in his company the benefit of the doubt that the system was giving them. He had been doing this for approximately 2.5 years when his battalion deployed to Syria in the summer of 2017. Vanover said to me, in that phone call, "Mr. Holloway, the phrase we used, among ourselves, in the company, when we talked about Captain Kallenbach, which we did not do in front of any male pilot in the company, because we had agreed among ourselves not to give the male pilots in the company the satisfaction of seeing us complain about him, was this. We said, Kallenbach does not have a problem with women. Kallenbach has a problem with women in his cockpit. The distinction matters. The first kind of man you can report. The second kind of man you cannot. The second kind of man simply makes sure that, by the time the deployment is over, the women in his company have not flown the missions that would have made them combat leads on the next deployment. He does not have to say anything to do this. He just has to do the scheduling. He did the scheduling. We noticed. We did not say anything. We were not going to be the ones who said anything. We were waiting for one of us to fly a mission that he could not take away from her. We did not know which one of us it was going to be. We did not know when it was going to happen. We knew, all 4 of us who were in that company in 2017, that it was going to happen. And we knew, because we had talked about it, that whichever one of us it happened to, the rest of us were going to back her up, completely, without being asked. That was the agreement. That is the agreement. That has been the agreement in every Apache company that has had more than one female pilot in it since approximately 2014. I am telling you this on the record. You can use my name. I am using her name. CW3 Lacey Vanover, United States Army, currently assigned to Fort Novosel as an instructor pilot, 8 years after the deployment to Syria, 3 years after she made CW3, 2 years after she sat down at her own kitchen table in Enterprise, Alabama, and wrote out, in longhand, on a yellow legal pad, the conversation she had had with 3 other female warrant officers in a Connex container at FOB Al-Tanf on the evening of the 18th of June, 2017, approximately 4 hours after Roman Kallenbach had finished his first all-pilots briefing in the briefing tent. I will tell you about the briefing now. The briefing tent at FOB Al-Tanf in June of 2017 was a standard Army general-purpose medium tent, approximately 32 feet long by 16 feet wide, with a center pole at each end and 3 center poles in between, with the sides rolled up partway in deference to the June heat in southeastern Syria, which on the evening of the 18th was approximately 96 degrees Fahrenheit at 1800 local. The tent contained, on that evening, 14 folding chairs arranged in 2 rows of 7 facing a folding table at the front, a portable whiteboard on a wheeled stand, a tactical map of the Al-Tanf garrison area of operations pinned to the back wall, and a small folding camp table with a coffee urn on it near the entrance flap. The 14 warrant officers of Alpha Company, 1st of the 3rd Aviation, were seated in the chairs. Captain Roman Kallenbach was standing in front of the table. The battalion S3 officer, a major whose name I am not going to use because he asked me not to, was standing at the back of the tent observing. The company first sergeant, a man named Master Sergeant Elijah Pettigrew, was standing to the side of the table near the whiteboard. Britta Sjogren was seated in the 2nd row, 3rd chair from the left aisle, with CW2 Lacey Vanover to her immediate right and CW3 Marcia Ingebrigtsen, the senior female warrant officer in the company, 2 chairs to her left. The 4th female warrant officer in the company, CW2 Imelda Costa Reyes, was seated in the 1st row at the far right. The 10 male warrant officers were distributed throughout the remaining seats. Kallenbach was holding a clipboard. He had been talking for approximately 12 minutes. He had covered the operational environment, the rules of engagement, the air tasking order cycle, and the maintenance posture of the company's 6AH 64DS. He had moved, in the way that company commanders move through an initial briefing, into the section on individual pilot assignments and flight schedules for the first 2 weeks of operations. He read off the names. He read off the assignments. He read them quickly, the way a man reads a list he has already decided about. He came to Britta Sjogren's name. He paused. He looked up from the clipboard. He looked at her, in the 2nd row, 3rd chair from the left. He said, in a voice that was perfectly clear and that carried, in the tent, to the back wall, "Sjogren, your maintenance test pilot, not combat lead. You fly when we need to check the bird, not when we need to kill things." He looked back down at the clipboard. He read the next name. He kept going. The silence in the tent, in the half-second between the end of his sentence about Sjogren and the beginning of his reading of the next name, was the silence of 14 warrant officers who had all, in that half-second, understood 3 things simultaneously. They had understood, first, that the company commander had just publicly defined the role of one of his pilots in terms that were technically accurate and that were unnecessary to state publicly. They had understood, second, that the pilot he had just defined was the only maintenance test pilot in the company, which meant that the comment had been directed at her by name and could not be interpreted as a general statement about MTP duties. They had understood, third, that the company commander had specifically chosen, in the wording of his statement, the phrase, "when we need to kill things," which was a phrase that no company commander in the United States Army aviation community would use in a formal briefing unless he was making a point about the pilot in question, and that the point he was making was that the pilot in question was not, in his view, a pilot who was going to be killing things on this deployment. CW3 Marcia Ingebrigtsen, in the second row, 2 chairs to Britta's left, did not look at Britta. She kept her eyes on Kallenbach. She did not move. She had been in the Army for 18 years. She had been an Apache pilot for 11 of those years. She had, by her own later account to me in a phone call in 2024, made the calculation in approximately a quarter of a second that the best thing I could do for Britta in that moment was not look at her, because if I looked at her, every other man in that tent was going to see me look at her, and every man in that tent was going to register the look. And the look was going to become the story instead of what Kallenbach had just said becoming the story. I needed Kallenbach's sentence to be the story. I needed it to sit there, by itself, in the middle of the tent, with no reaction from any of us, so that every man in the tent had to hear it the way it was. I did not look at her. None of us looked at her. We all knew not to. That was the agreement. We had not made the agreement out loud. We did not need to. We all knew. CW2 Lacey Vanover, in the second row, immediately to Britta's right, did the same thing. CW2 Imelda Costa Reyes, in the first row at the far right, did the same thing. The 4 female warrant officers of Alpha Company, in that half second, did not look at each other, and they did not look at Britta, and they did not look at Kallenbach, and they did not look at anything except the spot on the front of the tent that they had decided, before the briefing started, to look at if Kallenbach said something they were going to have to not react to. They had agreed on the spot in advance. They had not discussed what would qualify as a moment requiring the spot. They had not needed to. Britta Sjogren looked at the spot. She did not move her face. She did not change her posture. She did not write anything down. She had been written about in her father's logbook, by her father, on her 10th birthday, in a sentence she had read once and never mentioned to him, that said, in his careful pilot's handwriting, "She has the face. She will be all right." She did not, at the time she read it, know what the face was. She knew, at 31 years old, sitting in the second row of a briefing tent at FOB Al-Tanf, what the face was. She had it. She used it. The briefing continued for another 19 minutes. Kallenbach finished reading the assignments. He covered the maintenance schedule. He covered the crew rest plan. He took 2 questions from the male pilots in the first row, both of which were procedural and neither of which had anything to do with what he had said about Sjogren. He dismissed the company at approximately 1900 hours. The pilots filed out of the tent. The 4 female warrant officers walked, separately, to 4 different parts of the FOB. This was deliberate. This was also the agreement. They did not go to the dining facility together. They did not go to the Connex containers together. They did not collect in a group anywhere where they could be observed collecting in a group. Britta Sjogren walked to the maintenance pad, where she conducted, for approximately 40 minutes, an unscheduled visual inspection of all 6 of the company's Apaches, by herself, in the dimming Syrian evening light, because she had decided, on the walk from the briefing tent to the pad, that the best thing she could do with the next 40 minutes of her life was the work she had been told 6 minutes earlier and in front of 14 of her peers that she was going to be doing for the next 9 months. She was going to do the work. She was going to do it better than it had ever been done. She was going to do it so that every Apache in the company, when one of her fellow pilots strapped into it and went out to fly a combat mission she was not going to be flying, was going to come back. That was the decision she made on the walk to the pad. That was the decision she executed for the next 6 months, without complaint, without comment, without ever, in any conversation with any other pilot in the company, referring back to what Kallenbach had said in the briefing tent on the evening of the 18th of June, 2017. She did, however, write one thing down. She wrote it down that night, in the small green notebook she carried in the left chest pocket of her flight suit, which was a notebook her father had given her on the day she received her wings at Fort Rucker in May of 2007, and which she had been carrying, in the same pocket, in every flight suit she had worn for the previous 10 years. She had used the notebook for technical notes. She had used the notebook for waypoints. She had used the notebook, occasionally, when she could not sleep, for the kind of sentence a person writes down to remind herself of something she does not want to forget. She wrote, on the evening of the 18th of June, 2017, on the first blank page of the notebook, a single sentence. It was the only personal entry she made in the notebook during the entire deployment. She has the notebook still. It is in a drawer in her office at Fort Novosel. She showed it to me, briefly, when I went to interview her in the spring of 2025. She did not let me photograph it. She did not let me copy the sentence. She let me read it. I read it. I am going to give it to you now from memory, which is not the same as having it in front of me, but which is close enough for our purposes. The sentence read, "Fly the bird he gave you. Be the pilot he did not think you were. Do it without telling him." She underlined the last 6 words. She closed the notebook. She put it back in her pocket. She went to her conics. She slept. The 4 female warrant officers met in CW3 Ingebrigtsen's conics container at approximately 2200 hours that night. Ingebrigtsen's conics was at the end of the female officers' row, against the perimeter wall of the FOB, which meant that there was only one direction from which someone could approach it, which meant that the 4 of them, sitting on the 2 cots and the 2 folding chairs in the conics, could see, through the cracked open door, anyone who was coming. Nobody came. They sat in the conics for approximately 90 minutes. They did not drink. They did not have anything in the conics to drink. They drank water from camelbacks. They talked, in low voices, with the door cracked. Ingebrigtsen said, "Britta, I am the senior female warrant officer in this company. I am going to ask you one question. I am going to ask it once. I want you to give me an honest answer. Do you want me to go to the battalion commander?" Britta said, "No." Ingebrigtsen said, "Are you sure?" Britta said, "I am sure." Ingebrigtsen said, "Why?" Britta said, "Because if you go to the battalion commander, this becomes a story about him. I do not want this to be a story about him. I want this to be a story about an aircraft that comes back every time it flies, and that, when the moment comes that I have to be in it for a reason he did not anticipate, is going to be ready to do what I need it to do. That is the story I want to write. I want to write it with my hands. I do not want anyone to write it for me. Please do not go to the battalion commander." Ingebrigtsen was quiet for approximately 10 seconds. Then she said, "Okay, I am not going to go to the battalion commander. I am going to tell you what I am going to do instead. I am going to fly every mission he assigns me, and I am going to fly it perfectly, and the other 2 of us are going to do the same, and we're going to make sure, by the conduct of our flying, that when the moment comes that you have been waiting for, the institutional record of this company is going to be that the female pilots in this company flew at a higher standard than the male pilots in this company for the duration of this deployment. We are going to give you the cleanest possible runway to land on when the moment comes. That is what we are going to do. Is that acceptable?" Britta said, "That is acceptable." Vanover said, "Tonia." Britta said, "Yes." Vanover said, "Lacey." "I am Lacey. Tonia is somebody else." Britta said, "Lacey." "Sorry." Vanover said, "It is okay. You were tired. I want to say one thing. I want to say it to all of us. The moment is going to come. I do not know when. I do not know how. I know it is going to come, because moments like that always come on deployments like this one. And because the kind of man who says what he said in that tent today is the kind of man who is going to put himself in a position where he is going to need somebody like Britta to come and get him out of it. I have seen this movie. I am not telling Britta what to do when the moment comes. I am telling Britta that the rest of us are going to be ready to do whatever we need to do to make sure that when she is in the air, doing whatever she is doing, the rest of the company is not going to be in her way. That is the agreement. Is that the agreement? Ingebrigtsen said, that is the agreement. Costa Reyes said, that is the agreement. Britta said, that is the agreement. They sat in the conics for another 30 minutes. They did not talk about Kallenbach again. They talked about their families. Ingebrigtsen talked about her 2 sons in Colleen, ages 9 and 7. Vanover talked about her husband, a Black Hawk pilot in the same battalion, who was deploying to Kuwait in 3 months and who she had not seen since April. Costa Reyes talked about her mother in El Paso, who was 68 and who was beginning to forget things. Britta talked about her father. She told them about the photograph in the hallway. She told them about the 4 words. She told them what her father had said on the back porch on the night before she shipped to Fort Jackson. She did not tell them about the entry in his logbook from her 10th birthday, because she had never told anyone about it, and she was not going to start that night. She told them, instead, the thing she had decided on the walk from the briefing tent to the pad, which was that the only way to honor a father who did not talk about his war was to fly so well that nobody had to talk about hers. Ingebrigtsen said, Britta, that is a good sentence. Britta said, it is the only sentence I have. Ingebrigtsen said, it is enough. Go to sleep. They went to sleep. I am going to give you the next 6 months in a single paragraph, because the next 6 months are not the story, and because Britta Sjogren herself, when I asked her, in the spring of 2025, what she remembered about the next 6 months, said to me, Mr. Holloway, I remember the maintenance logs. I remember the airframes. I remember which aircraft had which problems and in which order I solved them. I do not remember anything else about those 6 months in the way that another person would remember it, because I had decided on the 18th of June that the only thing I was going to do for the next 9 months was the job, and the job was the airframes, and the airframes are what I remember. If you want me to tell you about the food at the dining facility, or about the movies we watched in the rec conics, or about the calls home, I cannot help you. I did the job. The job was the airframes. The airframes were ready. That is what I remember. She flew, in the period between the 18th of June, 2017, and the 14th of December, 2017, approximately 140 maintenance test flights. She flew them in all 6 of the company's Apaches, multiple times each. She conducted, in the same period, approximately 300 individual maintenance inspections, all of which are documented in the company's maintenance records. She submitted, in the same period, 14 separate written maintenance recommendations to the company maintenance officer, 12 of which were adopted, and 2 of which were adopted only after she submitted them a second time with additional supporting data, and which were, both of them, items that would later be identified by Army Aviation Maintenance Review Boards as having prevented incidents that could have resulted in the loss of aircraft. She did not fly a single combat mission. She did not request to fly a single combat mission. She did not, in any conversation with any pilot in the company, refer to the fact that she was not flying combat missions. She did her job. The 4 female warrant officers, by mutual unspoken agreement, ate dinner together at the dining facility approximately 3 nights a week, in a casual rotation that did not appear to be a rotation. They did not discuss Kallenbach at any of these dinners. They did not need to. Kallenbach flew. He flew well. He flew aggressively. He led, in the period from June to December, 23 combat missions, all of which were successful, none of which resulted in the loss of any aircraft, none of which resulted in any injuries to his pilots. He was, by every external measure, exactly the company commander the Army wanted him to be. He treated his male pilots well. He treated his female pilots, by the external measure of his behavior, professionally. He did not, in the 6 months between the briefing and the 14th of December, repeat the comment he had made in the briefing tent. He did not need to. He had said it once. It had landed where he wanted it to land. He had moved on to running the company. On the 13th of December, 2017, H. 64 detail number 87-0426, which was the third aircraft British Shogren had inspected on her unscheduled walk-around on the evening of the 18th of June, and which had been, throughout the deployment, the aircraft she had spent the most time on, completed a 120-hour phase inspection at the FOB maintenance facility. The inspection had been conducted by the company maintenance crew over the previous 4 days. The final maintenance test flight was scheduled for the morning of the 14th of December, at which point the aircraft would be returned to fully mission-capable status. The pilot scheduled to conduct the maintenance test flight was British Shogren. The flight was scheduled for 0900 local on the 14th. She conducted the flight at 0900 local on the 14th. The flight lasted 47 minutes. The aircraft performed within all specifications. The hydraulic system, which had been a recurring concern on this particular airframe, held pressure throughout the full range of cyclic and collective inputs. The targeting system, which had been recalibrated during the phase inspection, tracked properly across all 4 laser designation modes. The weapons systems, which were not loaded for the test flight, but which were tested in simulation mode, responded correctly to all back seat and front seat inputs. British Shogren landed the aircraft at 0947, taxied it to the maintenance pad, shut down, signed off the test flight in the maintenance logbook, signed off the airframe as returned to fully mission-capable status, and walked back to the operations tent. She handed the logbook to the operations sergeant. She got a cup of coffee from the urn. She sat down at one of the folding tables in the operations tent to drink the coffee and write up her flight notes in the green notebook. The time was approximately 1000 local. At 10:04 local, the radio in the operations tent, which was monitoring the company tactical net, crackled. The voice on the radio was the voice of Captain Roman Kallenbach. He was airborne. He was the lead aircraft of a 2-ship flight that had launched from Al-Tanf at 0945, 15 minutes earlier, in response to a request from a Special Operations Joint Task Force ground element supporting Syrian Democratic Forces operations approximately 42 minutes flight time to the north, near the town of Abu Kamal. The wingman, in the trail aircraft, was CW-3 Marcia Engebretson. The radio call was a standard check-in. Kallenbach was reporting his flight feet wet at the Euphrates crossing point, which meant that he had crossed the river and was now in the operational area. The operations sergeant, a staff sergeant named Rennie Toussaint, acknowledged the check-in. British Shogren drank her coffee. She wrote her flight notes. She did not look up at the radio. She had no reason to look up at the radio. At 10:31 local, the radio crackled again. The voice was Kallenbach's. The voice was different. The voice was the voice of a pilot reporting an emergency. He said, Al-Tanf TOC, Sabre 6. We have a situation. SDF element under contact from armor. Repeat, armor. 4 T-72s, grid coordinate follows. He gave the grid coordinate. He gave the distance from the SDF position. He gave the estimated time to contact, which was, by his read of the situation, approximately 14 minutes. Staff Sergeant Toussaint acknowledged. Britta Sjogren stopped writing in her notebook. She did not look up. She put the pen down. She listened. Kallenbach said, engaging. Sabre 6 in. Sabre 2 follow. The radio went quiet for approximately 40 seconds. Then the radio crackled again. The voice was Kallenbach's. The voice was the voice of a pilot in extremis. He said, hit. Sabre 6 is hit. Engine 2 out, hydraulics dropping. Going down. Repeat, Sabre 6 going down. Grid follows. He gave the grid. The radio went quiet. CW3 Ingebrigtsen's voice came on the net. She said, in the voice of a pilot who has just watched her flight lead take a man-pads in the tail, and who is now the senior aircraft on station with no Hellfires remaining because the first pass had expended them, and who is now the only friendly aircraft within 40 minutes of a SDF position that is 14 minutes from being overrun by 4 T-72s. Altamf to C, Sabre 2. Sabre 6 is down. I have eyes on the crash site. 6 is moving. Repeat, 6 is moving. He is out of the aircraft. He is moving toward cover. I am Winchester on Hellfires. I am returning to FOB for reload. ETA 46 minutes. Recommend immediate launch of relief aircraft. The tanks are still rolling. SDF position will not hold. Staff Sergeant Toussaint keyed his microphone. He said, Sabre 2, Altamf TOC. Acknowledge. Stand by. He set the microphone down. He turned around in his chair. He looked at the operations tent. The operations tent contained, at that moment, Staff Sergeant Toussaint, 2 other operations specialists, the company executive officer who was a CW3 named Deir, and Britta Sjogren. Toussaint said, Sir, we need to launch the alert bird. Where is Mr. Hollings? CW3 Deir, who had been standing at the situation map at the back of the tent, said, Hollings is on medical. Food poisoning. He is in his rack with a fever of 102. He is not flying anything today. Toussaint said, Who is the backup? Deir said, There is no backup. The schedule has Hollings on alert until 1800. Everybody else is either airborne, on crew rest, or down for the day. Toussaint said, Sir, we have 1 bird ready to go. Tail number 87-0426. Just came off MTP this morning. Fueled and armed. For Hellfires, 2 rocket pods, full 30 mic. Nobody to fly it. Deir was quiet. He looked at the situation map. He looked at the radio on the table where Staff Sergeant Toussaint was sitting. He looked, for approximately 2 seconds, at the patch of canvas above the radio where nothing in particular was happening. Then he turned, slowly, in the way a man turns when he has just understood that the next sentence out of his mouth is going to be a sentence he is going to have to defend to his battalion commander, and he looked at Britta Sjogren, who was sitting at the folding table 8 feet from him with her notebook open and her coffee cup in her hand, and her face arranged in the same expression it had been arranged in for the previous 6 months, which was the expression of a pilot who was waiting, without appearing to wait, for someone in the company to need something that only she could provide. He said, Sjogren. She said, Sir. He said, Tail number 87-0426 is fueled, armed, and signed off. You signed it off 40 minutes ago. You are MTP qualified. You are the only pilot on this FOB right now who is, by regulation, authorized to fly an Apache solo from the back seat in an emergency. Sabre 6 is on the ground. Sabre 2 is Winchester. There are 4 T-72s 13 minutes from a SDF blocking position that is not going to hold against 4 T-72s. I am not going to order you to take that aircraft up. I am going to ask you, will you take that aircraft up? She had already closed the notebook. She had already capped the pen. She had already set the coffee cup down on the folding table at a position approximately 4 inches to the left of where it had been when she had picked it up 40 seconds earlier, which was the position at which she always set the coffee cup when she was about to stand up from a folding table and walk out of an operations tent. She stood up. She put the notebook in her left chest pocket. She put the pen in her right chest pocket. She said, in the same voice she had been using for 6 months in every conversation with every pilot in the company, which was the voice of a person who had decided, in advance, that nothing she said in the company was going to carry any emotional weight that the listener could later use against her. Sir, I will take the aircraft up. I need battalion clearance for solo combat employment in MTP mode. I need the grid for the tanks and the grid for the SDF position. I need a frequency for the SDF ground controller. I need a frequency for Sabre 6 in case he is up on his survival radio. I need to be wheels up in 4 minutes. Can you make that happen, sir? Devereaux said, yes. He turned to Toussaint. He said, Rennie, get me Battalion S3 on the secure. Right now. Toussaint already had the handset in his hand. He had picked it up at the same moment Devereaux had turned to look at Britta. He had been pouring coffee for combat aviation officers for 14 years. He had known what Devereaux was going to say 2 seconds before Devereaux had said it. He keyed the handset. He said, Reaper 3, this is Sabre TOC, requesting Reaper 3 for command priority, over. The Battalion S3, a major named Hollister Crane, was on the net inside of 15 seconds. Devereaux took the handset. He explained the situation in approximately 40 seconds, in the clean tactical shorthand of a CW3 executive officer who has briefed a Battalion S3 approximately 1,000 times in his career and who knows that the difference between getting clearance and not getting clearance is, in moments like this one, the difference between presenting the request as a request and presenting it as an operational fact that the S3 is being given the courtesy of approving. Crane was quiet for approximately 3 seconds on the other end. Then he said, Devereaux, confirm the pilot. Is that Sjogren? Devereaux said, that is Sjogren. Crane said, she is MTP qualified. Devereaux said, she is MTP qualified. She is current on AGM 114. She signed off 0426 at 0947 this morning. She knows that airframe better than anyone in the company. Crane was quiet again for approximately 2 seconds. Then he said, she is the only pilot you have. Devereaux said, she is the only pilot I have. Crane said, cleared hot. Solo MTP combat employment, tail 87-0426, against the armor column at the grid you just gave me. Battalion accepts the risk. Tell her to bring my aircraft back, and tell her to bring my company commander back. In that order if she has to choose. Crane out. Devereaux set the handset down. He looked at Britta. He said, you heard him. She said, I heard him. He said, go. She went. She walked out of the operations tent. She did not run. She walked, in the same measured pace she had been walking in for 6 months. She walked across the gravel pad to the maintenance line, where tail number 87-0426 was sitting on its main mounts with its rotor blades tied down and its pitot covers still on and its weapons load prepositioned and signed off. The crew chief, a staff sergeant named Joaquin Estrellas, was already standing beside the aircraft with the pitot covers in his hand. He had heard the radio traffic. He had run from his conics to the maintenance pad in the 4 minutes between Sabre 2's call and the moment Britta had walked out of the operations tent. He had pulled the tie-downs. He had pulled the covers. He had done the things a crew chief does when he knows the bird is going up and he does not know yet who is flying it. He saw Britta. He understood, in approximately the same half-second the operations tent had understood it 40 seconds earlier, that the answer to the question of who was flying it was the answer that was now walking toward him across the gravel. He said, Chief. She said, Joaquin. He said, she's ready. For Hellfires, 2 pods, full mic. I topped her off myself an hour ago. She's good. Britta said. Thank you, Joaquin. She climbed up the side of the fuselage. She strapped into the back seat. She ran the start sequence from memory, which she had run from memory 2 hours and 17 minutes earlier, and which she could have run from memory in her sleep, and which she had, in fact, run from memory in her sleep on approximately 4 occasions during the deployment that she had later been embarrassed enough about that she had not told anyone, including her father, including Ingebrigtsen. She brought the auxiliary power unit online. She brought the first engine online. She brought the second engine online. She ran the rotor up. She brought the targeting system online. She brought the weapons system online. She switched the weapons control to backseat emergency mode, which was the mode she had certified on as an MTP and which she had practiced, in simulation, approximately 300 times in the previous 6 months, because she had decided, on the 18th of June, 2017, that the simulation was the closest she was going to get to the real thing, and that if she ever needed the real thing, the simulation was going to be the difference between bringing the aircraft back and not bringing it back. She came up on the company net. She said, Sabre TOC, Sabre 4, wheels up in 60 seconds, taking 0426 north to the grid, request final clearance, over. Toussaint, in the operations tent, said, Sabre 4, Sabre TOC, you are cleared, Godspeed. She said, Sabre 4 copies out. She lifted off at 10:38 local. The wheels of tail number 87-0426 left the gravel pad of FOB Altamf 34 minutes after Captain Roman Kallenbach had reported feet wet at the Euphrates crossing point, 22 minutes after he had taken a man pads in the tail of his aircraft, 15 minutes after his wingman had reported him moving toward cover on the ground, and 11 minutes after CW3 Devereaux had asked her, in the operations tent, if she would take the aircraft up. She was alone in the aircraft. There was no co-pilot in the front seat. The front seat instrument panel was dark, which is what the front seat instrument panel does in MTP solo mode, because the systems are configured to be operated entirely from the back seat. She had 4 AGM-114K Hellfire missiles on the rails. She had 2 Hydra rocket pods on the inboard pylons. She had a full load for the M230 chain gun. She had, in front of her in the back seat, the reduced functionality TADS interface that the Army had built into the back seat for exactly the situation she was now in, and that was, by the assessment of every pilot who had ever used it in training, harder to use than the front seat interface by approximately a factor of 3. She had 940 pounds of fuel in the main tanks, which at the cruise profile she was going to fly to the engagement area was approximately enough to get her to the engagement area, conduct the engagement, and return to the FOB with a fuel reserve below the regulatory minimum. She had no wingman. She had no overhead. She had no relief aircraft inbound. She had Ingebrigtsen returning to the FOB for reload at maximum speed and an ETA of 41 minutes, which was 27 minutes after the tanks were estimated to be in contact with the SDF position. She was, in the strictly operational sense, the only thing standing between 4 T-72 main battle tanks and approximately 60 Syrian Democratic Forces fighters in a hasty blocking position on the west side of a contested river crossing 1,800 meters north of where Captain Roman Kallenbach was, at that moment, lying in a shallow ditch with a broken left wrist and a concussion, watching, through the heat shimmer over the desert, the dust plumes of the tanks moving south. She flew north at 148 knots indicated, at 120 feet above ground level, in a straight line from the FOB to the grid that Devereaux had given her. She did not deviate. She did not climb. She did not transmit. She flew the airframe she had inspected the previous evening, the airframe she had signed off that morning, the airframe she had spent more time on than any pilot in the company. In the configuration, that airframe had been designed to be flown in at the speed and altitude that minimized her exposure to ground fire and maximized her arrival time at the engagement area, which is what an MTP does when an MTP is also, in the moment, the only combat asset available. She arrived over the engagement area at 10:51 local, 13 minutes after takeoff. She acquired the tanks visually before she acquired them on the TADS. They were where Kallenbach had said they were. They were in a loose column, spread approximately 200 meters apart, moving south on what had been, before the war, a paved secondary road and was now a graded dirt track. The lead tank was approximately 1,800 meters from the SDF position. The estimated time to contact, by her own quick calculation, was 3 minutes. She came up on the SDF ground controller's frequency. She said, Sierra Delta Foxtrot ground, Sabre 4, single Apache inbound your position, engaging armor column to your north, request you keep your heads down, over. The ground controller, a former United States Army Special Forces Sergeant First Class named Webb Pemberton, who had separated from the Army in 2014 and who had been working as a contractor advisor with the SDF since 2016, and who had been, until the moment Britta's voice came up on his frequency, approximately 90 seconds away from telling his SDF counterparts to displace from the blocking position because the position was not going to hold, said, in a voice that he would later describe to me, in a phone call from his home in Boise, Idaho, in 2024, as the voice of a man who has just been told by an unfamiliar female pilot. On a frequency I had been listening to nothing but bad news on for the previous 20 minutes, that the cavalry had arrived and was a single helicopter flown by one pilot, and who had decided, in the half-second before I keyed the handset, to trust her completely, because the alternative was to not trust her, and the alternative was going to result in 60 dead SDF fighters in the next 4 minutes. Pemberton said, Sabre 4, Sierra Delta Foxtrot ground. Copy your inbound. Heads are down. You are cleared hot on the column. There is nothing friendly between the column and us. Engage at your discretion. Out. She switched to the company net. She said, Sabre TOC, Sabre 4, in the fight. Out. She did not transmit again for 11 minutes. I am going to tell you what happened in the next 11 minutes in the order it happened, because the order matters, because the order is the thing that the 4 Apache instructor pilots at Fort Novosel who have, in the years since, studied the gun camera footage of this engagement as part of the AH-64 MTP solo combat employment case study, have identified as the thing that makes this engagement different from every other Apache engagement in the official records of the United States Army aviation community. The thing that makes it different is not the result. The result has been replicated in different forms by other Apache pilots in other engagements. The thing that makes it different is the sequencing. The thing that makes it different is that British Sjogren, alone in an Apache, with a workload that the Army's own training documents describe as exceeding the cognitive capacity of a single human being under combat conditions, did the engagement in the order that an MTP would do it, which is to say, in the order that a pilot who has spent 21 months thinking about her aircraft as a system rather than as a weapon would do it. She did not engage the lead tank first. She engaged the rear tank first. This was a deliberate choice. She made the choice in approximately 2 seconds as she came over the engagement area. She made it because she had registered, in those 2 seconds, 3 things. She had registered that the tanks were in a loose column on a graded dirt road with no shoulders, which meant that none of the 4 tanks could maneuver laterally to escape an attack from behind. She had registered that the lead tank was the tank closest to the SDF position and was therefore the tank that the SDF position was most concerned about, and that engaging the lead tank first would create a tactical situation in which the remaining 3 tanks would have approximately 90 seconds to disperse off the road into the surrounding terrain and break the column structure that made them vulnerable. She had registered that engaging the rear tank first would create a tactical situation in which the remaining 3 tanks would be trapped between the burning hulk of the rear tank, which would block the road behind them, and the SDF position to their south, and would have nowhere to go except forward into her next 3 engagements. She engaged the rear tank first. She fired the first Hellfire at a range of 2,400 meters in a constrained left turn from a launch altitude of 140 feet above ground level, with the laser designator on the rear tank's engine deck, where the armor was thinnest and where the AGM-114KS tandem-shaped charge warhead would defeat the explosive reactive armor most efficiently. The missile time of flight was approximately 14 seconds. The missile arrived through the engine deck of the rear T-72 at 10:53 local. The tank, which had a crew of 3 and which was carrying a full ammunition load, and which was, like all T-72s, designed with an auto-loader that stored its ammunition in an exposed carousel directly below the turret floor, did what T-72s do when their ammunition compartment is breached by a tandem-shaped charge warhead. The turret left the hull. The turret traveled approximately 40 feet into the air, end over end, and came to rest in the desert approximately 60 feet behind where the hull was now burning. She was already maneuvering to the next firing position. She engaged the 3rd tank in the column at a range of 2,100 meters from a different angle with the same procedure. Missile time of flight, 12 seconds. Impact at 10:55 local. The 3rd tank's crew, which had observed the rear tank's destruction approximately 90 seconds earlier and which had begun to traverse its turret to engage the helicopter, had not completed the traverse when the Hellfire arrived through the left side of the turret ring. The 3rd tank burned. The 2nd tank in the column tried to back up. The lead tank in the column tried to leave the road to the east. Neither maneuver was completed. She engaged the 2nd tank at a range of 1,800 meters in a hover from a position to the west of the column. The Hellfire arrived through the turret roof at 10:57 local. She engaged the lead tank at a range of 1,400 meters from a position that she had repositioned to in the previous 90 seconds, while the lead tank was attempting to negotiate a soft shoulder that its driver had misjudged. The Hellfire arrived through the rear engine deck at 10:59 local. For tanks. For Hellfires, 11 minutes from wheels up to the impact of the 4th missile. 1 passed through the engagement area, with 3 repositions, no second runs, no missed shots, no expenditure of rockets or chain gun ammunition. The aircraft took approximately 40 rounds of small arms fired during the engagement, none of which struck a critical system, all of which were absorbed by the airframe's redundant structural design. The crew chief, Staff Sergeant Estrellas, would later count and document each of the impact points on the airframe and would tell me, in a phone call in 2025, "Mr. Holloway, I have been a crew chief on Apaches for 16 years. I have inspected approximately 200 airframes that took ground fire in combat. The pattern of impacts on 0426 from that day is the pattern of an aircraft that was being flown by a pilot who was not, at any point in the engagement, predictable to the gunners on the ground. There is no other way to read it. The impacts are scattered across the airframe in a way that says she was never in the same place twice for long enough for them to walk their fire onto her. That is an MTP flying. That is a person who knows the airframe down to the rivet level and who is using every inch of the flight envelope. I have not seen another set of impact patterns like it. I do not expect to. She came up on the SDF ground controller's frequency at 1100 local. She said, Sierra Delta Foxtrot ground, Sabre 4. Armor column is destroyed. Repeat, for tanks destroyed. No survivors. You are clear. Pemberton said, Sabre 4, Sierra Delta Foxtrot ground. Acknowledged. Thank you, ma'am. We owe you. She said, Sabre 4, no debt. Out. She switched to the company net. She said, Sabre TOC, Sabre 4. For tanks destroyed. Engaging recovery of Sabre 6. State your last grid on 6. Over. Toussaint relayed the grid. She flew to the grid. She arrived over Callenbach's downed aircraft at 1104 local. She did not land. She could not have landed. The aircraft she was in was a single pilot configuration with no provision for an additional passenger, and she did not have the fuel margin to attempt anything beyond visual confirmation. She flew, instead, a slow oval over the crash site at a low altitude. With her TADS slewed onto the ditch, she had identified approximately 300 meters northeast of the burning hulk of Sabre 6. She acquired Callenbach visually. He was in the ditch. He was sitting up. He was holding his left wrist against his chest with his right hand. He was looking up at her aircraft. He saw her aircraft. He raised his right hand in a slow wave. She came up on the SDF frequency. She gave Pemberton the grid of the ditch. She said, Sierra Delta Foxtrot ground, Sabre 4, I have eyes on Sabre 6. He is mobile and conscious. I cannot extract. I am Winchester on combat capability, and I am Bingo on fuel. Request you push a SDF element to his position for ground extraction. Over. Pemberton said, Sabre 4, Sierra Delta Foxtrot ground. Element is moving. ETA his position 25 minutes. She said, Sabre 4 copies. I am on station for 10 more minutes for Overwatch. Then I am returning to FOB. Will you accept the handoff? He said, I will accept the handoff. She stayed on station for 10 minutes. She flew the slow oval over Callenbach's position. She did not transmit again, except to confirm, 3 times, that no additional threats were visible in the vicinity. She watched the dust plume of the SDF technical column as it began to approach the crash site from the east. At 1114 local, with the SDF element approximately 8 minutes from Callenbach's position and her fuel state at 14%, she came up on Pemberton's frequency and said, Sierra Delta Foxtrot ground, Sabre 4, I have to break station. Sabre 6 is yours. Take care of him. Pemberton said, Sabre 4, he is ours. Get home safe. She turned south. She flew the airframe back to Al-Tanf at the cruise profile that maximized her remaining range. She landed on the FOB pad at 1131 local with 14% fuel indicated and 1 AGM. 114K Hellfire remaining on the right outboard pylon, which she had not fired because she had not needed to fire it, and because, by her own later explanation to the post-mission debriefer, the engagement required 4 missiles. I fired 4 missiles. I do not fire missiles I do not need to fire. That is what the training says. That is what I did. She taxied to the maintenance pad. She shut down. She unstrapped. She climbed down the side of the fuselage. Staff Sergeant Estrellas was standing at the bottom. He did not say anything. He handed her a bottle of water. She took the water. She drank approximately half of it. She handed the bottle back to him. She said, Joaquin. She held together. Good airframe. He said, Yes, Chief. She walked across the gravel pad to the operations tent. She walked in. The tent contained Devereaux, Toussaint, the 2 operations specialists, and now also the battalion S3, Major Crane, who had driven the 400 meters from the battalion TOC to the company TOC at some point in the previous 20 minutes, and who was standing at the situation map with his arms crossed. They all looked at her when she walked in. She did not look at them. She walked to the folding table where she had been sitting 2 hours and 40 minutes earlier. She picked up her notebook. She picked up her pen. She picked up the coffee cup, which was still where she had set it down, and which still contained approximately a quarter inch of coffee that was now cold. She drank the coffee. She set the cup down. She said, "To Devereaux, sir. Tail 0426 is back." She took small arms. I counted approximately 40 impacts. None on critical systems. She will need a full ground inspection before her next sortie. I recommend a 4-hour maintenance hold. I will conduct the post-flight inspection myself when I have written up my mission report. Permission to be dismissed to write the report, sir. Devereaux said, "Permission granted." She turned to go. Crane said, "Chief Sjogren." She turned back. She said, "Sir." Crane said, "For tanks." She said, "Yes, sir." Crane said, 11 minutes. She said, "Yes, sir." Crane said, "Solo." From the back seat. In MTP mode. She said, "Yes, sir." Crane was quiet for approximately 4 seconds. Then he said, "Go write your report, Chief." She said, "Yes, sir." She walked out of the tent. She walked to her conics. She wrote the report. The report was 4 pages long. It described the engagement in the same dry technical language that every Apache mission report ever written has described every Apache engagement in. It did not contain any sentence in which she described what she had thought or felt at any point in the engagement. It did not contain any reference to the briefing on the 18th of June, 2017. It did not contain any reference to Captain Roman Kallenbach by name, except in the section in which she described the overwatch of his crash site, in which she referred to him by his call sign. She finished the report at 1340 local. She walked back to the operations tent. She handed the report to Devereaux. She walked to the maintenance pad. She conducted the post-flight inspection of tail number 87-0426. The inspection took 2 hours and 10 minutes. She found 17 items requiring maintenance action, 3 of which she classified as priority and 14 of which she classified as routine. She wrote up the maintenance discrepancy sheet. She handed it to Staff Sergeant Estrellas. She walked back to her conics. She took off her flight suit. She took a shower in the female shower trailer at the end of the row, which was empty at that hour because the other 3 female warrant officers were still airborne or in the operations tent. She put on a clean PT uniform. She went to the dining facility. She ate a chicken sandwich and a cup of yogurt. She drank a bottle of water. She walked back to her conics. She lay down on her cot. She did not sleep. She did not write in the notebook. She lay on the cot with her hands folded across her stomach, and she looked at the ceiling of the conics container, which was approximately 7 feet above her, and which was painted the same off-white color that the ceilings of all conics containers on all FOBs in all theaters of all wars the United States Army has fought in since the invention of the conics container have been painted, and she did not move for approximately 3 hours, until the sound of an SDF technical column pulling into the FOB perimeter at approximately 1700 local caused her to sit up on the edge of the cot, because she had been listening for that sound, without admitting to herself that she had been listening for it, for the previous 3 hours. She did not go out to meet the column. She put on her boots. She put on her flight suit blouse. She walked, in the same measured pace she had been walking in for 6 months, from her conics to the medical tent at the western edge of the FOB, which was where Captain Roman Kallenbach was, by her calculation, going to be taken when he was offloaded from the SDF technical. She did not go inside the medical tent. She stood approximately 40 feet from the entrance, on the gravel walkway, with her hands in the cargo pockets of her flight suit, and she waited. The SDF technical pulled up to the medical tent at 1706. Two SDF fighters helped Kallenbach down from the bed of the truck. He was walking under his own power. His left wrist was splinted with what looked like a piece of broken-down rifle stock and a strip of olive-drab cloth, which she would later learn had been improvised by Webb Pemberton at the crash site approximately 40 minutes after Kallenbach had been extracted from his ditch. His flight suit was torn at the left shoulder and was stained dark across the lower left chest with what was either dried blood or hydraulic fluid or both. His face was streaked with dirt and sweat, and with the thin dark smear of dried blood from a laceration above his right eyebrow that had been closed, again by Pemberton, with 3 butterfly bandages from a SDF medic's aid bag. He was conscious. He was walking. He was, by the standards of a pilot who had taken a man-pads in the tail of his aircraft 6 hours earlier, and who had executed an auto-rotation into a desert wadi from approximately 400 feet AGL, in remarkably good shape. He saw her. He was approximately 30 feet from the medical tent entrance, walking between the 2 SDF fighters who were not quite holding him up, but who were walking close enough on either side that he could have leaned on either of them if he had needed to. He saw her standing on the gravel walkway. He stopped walking. The 2 SDF fighters stopped with him. He looked at her for approximately 2 seconds. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. He nodded, once, slowly, the way a man nods when he is acknowledging something that he is going to have to find the words for later and that he does not have the words for now. She nodded back. He started walking again. He went into the medical tent. The flap closed behind him. She turned around. She walked back to her conics. She took off the flight suit blouse. She took off the boots. She lay back down on the cot. She slept, this time, for approximately 11 hours. The after-action review for the engagement was conducted in the briefing tent at 0900 local on the morning of the 15th of December, 2017, approximately 22 hours after the engagement. The tent contained, on that morning, Major Crane from Battalion S-3, CW3 Devereaux as acting company commander, Master Sergeant Pettigrew as company first sergeant, CW3 Ingebrigtsen as the surviving wingman from the original flight, Britta Sjogren as the engagement pilot, and Captain Roman Kallenbach, who was seated in the front row in a clean flight suit with his left arm in a proper medical sling and with the laceration above his eyebrow, now closed with 3 actual sutures from the FOB medical officer, and who was, by the assessment of that medical officer, cleared for limited duty pending follow-up at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, where he was scheduled to be evacuated within 72 hours. Crane ran the AAR. He ran it in the standard Army format. He covered the mission, the execution, the outcomes, the lessons learned. He went through the engagement minute by minute, using the gun camera footage from tail number 87-0426, which had been pulled and reviewed overnight by the battalion intelligence officer. He covered Ingebrigtsen's actions as wingman. He covered Britta's actions as the solo MTP relief aircraft. He covered the SDF coordination. He covered Kallenbach's actions on the ground after the auto-rotation, including Kallenbach's correct decision to displace from the immediate vicinity of the crashed aircraft and to move to a covered position from which he could be seen by friendly aircraft. He did not, in the course of the AAR, single out any individual pilot for either praise or criticism. He ran the AAR the way an Army S-3 runs an AAR, which is dry, procedural, and without commentary that does not serve the operational learning objective. The AAR lasted 90 minutes. At the end of the AAR, Crane closed his folder. He looked at the room. He said, "We are clear. AAR is concluded. Any final remarks from the participants?" Nobody spoke. Crane looked at Kallenbach. He said, "Captain Kallenbach, you are the senior pilot present, and you are the recovered downed aviator. Anything for the record. Kallenbach was quiet for approximately 4 seconds. Then he stood up. He stood up slowly, because his left wrist was in a sling, and because the muscles across his lower back had stiffened in the way the muscles across the lower back of a pilot who has taken a hard auto-rotation will stiffen in the 22 hours after the auto-rotation. He stood up and he turned, in the front row, so that he was facing British Sjogren, who was seated in the second row, 3 seats to the left of the center aisle. He said, "Chief Sjogren." She said, "Sir." He said, "Will you stand up, please?" She stood up. He said, "Chief Sjogren, on the 18th of June of this year, in this tent, in front of 14 of your fellow warrant officers, I made a statement to you that was, in the words I chose, accurate, and that was, in the intent behind the words I chose, wrong. I told you that you were a maintenance test pilot, not a combat lead, and that you flew when we needed to check the aircraft, not when we needed to kill things. The accurate part of the statement was that you are a maintenance test pilot. The wrong part of the statement was everything else. I knew it was wrong when I said it. I said it anyway. I have spent the previous 6 months treating you as though I had been right when I said it, which was a continuation of being wrong, and which was, in its accumulation across 6 months, worse than the original statement, because the original statement could be characterized as a single bad sentence in a single briefing, and the 6 months that followed it cannot be characterized as anything other than a sustained pattern of conduct that I now understand to have been beneath me, beneath the company, and beneath the army that pays both of us to behave better than I behaved. The tent was perfectly silent. Master Sergeant Pettigrew, at the back, did not move. Major Crane, at the front, did not move. Ingebrigtsen, seated 2 rows behind Kallenbach, looked at the spot on the front of the tent that the 4 female warrant officers had agreed to look at on the evening of the 18th of June. She kept looking at it. Kallenbach said, "Yesterday, at approximately 10:38 local, you took an aircraft up that you were not, by the schedule I had built, supposed to take up. You took it up solo. You took it up in MTP combat employment mode. You flew it to the engagement area in 13 minutes. You destroyed 4 T-72 main battle tanks belonging to the Islamic State in 11 minutes, using 4 Hellfire missiles, with no missed shots and no second passes. You overwatched my position for 10 additional minutes until SDF ground forces could reach me. You returned to this FOB with 14% fuel and 1 Hellfire remaining. You did not, at any point in the engagement or after the engagement, transmit anything on any net that could be characterized as anything other than a clean tactical communication. You did not, at any point yesterday or last night or this morning, say anything to me or about me, in private or in public, that referred back to what I said in this tent on the 18th of June. You have been, in the conduct of the previous 22 hours, exactly the pilot the Army trained you to be and exactly the pilot I told 14 of your peers 6 months ago that you were not. I was wrong. I am saying it on the record. I am saying it in front of the same officers in front of whom I said the original thing, to the extent that they are present in this room, which most of them are. I am sorry. He reached, with his right hand, to the left chest of his flight suit. He unfastened the Velcro cover over the embroidered cloth combat action badge that was sewn onto the chest of his flight suit, which was the field version of the badge he had been awarded in 2002 for his actions in the Shawkat Valley. He did not have the metal badge with him on the FOB. He had the cloth version on the flight suit. He pulled the Velcro patch off the chest of his flight suit. He held it in his right hand for approximately 2 seconds. He looked at it. Then he stepped forward around the front row of folding chairs, and he walked to the second row, and he stopped in front of British Sjogren, and he held out his right hand with the cloth combat action badge in it. He said, "You earned this twice. I earned mine once. Take it. She said, Sir, I cannot take that. He said, You can take it. I am giving it to you. I am asking you to take it. She said, Sir, with respect, the army will issue me my own when the paperwork goes through. I do not need yours. He said, Chief, the army will issue you your own. That is correct. I am not offering you the army's. I am offering you mine. There is a difference. The difference is the thing I am trying to acknowledge in this room. Please take it. She looked at him. She looked at the patch in his hand. She looked at his face. She looked, for approximately 2 seconds, at the spot on the front of the tent. Then she reached out with her right hand, and she took the patch from him. He said, Thank you. She said, Yes, sir. He stepped back. He returned to his seat in the front row. He sat down. Major Crane looked at the room. He said, We are concluded. Dismissed. The room dismissed. The pilots filed out. Berta walked out with the cloth patch held in her right hand at her side. She walked back to her conics. She put the patch in the front pocket of the small green notebook her father had given her on the day she received her wings in 2007. She closed the notebook. She put the notebook back in the left chest pocket of her flight suit. She did not look at the patch again that day. She has the patch still. It is in a frame on the desk in her office at Fort Novosel. It is not on her wall. It is not on her uniform. It is on her desk, under a small brass lamp that her father gave her when she made CW3 in 2019, in a position where she can see it when she is working and where her students, when they come into the office, can see it but cannot necessarily identify what it is. They think it is hers. It is hers. It is also Kallenbach's. The two things are not in conflict. That is the point. Captain Roman Kallenbach was medically evacuated to Landstuhl on the 18th of December, 2017. He was treated for the wrist fracture, the concussion, and a hairline fracture of the L4 vertebra that had not been identified in the initial FOB medical examination, and that was identified at Landstuhl on the 19th. He recovered. He was returned to limited flight duty in February of 2018. He was returned to full flight duty in May of 2018. He completed the remainder of his Syria deployment with a different battalion. He returned to the United States in September of 2018. He was promoted to no further ranks. He stayed at CW4. He retired from the United States Army on the 14th of December, 2021, exactly 4 years to the day after the engagement at the river crossing north of Abu Kamal. He returned to Vermont. He bought a small house in the town of Heinsberg, 3 miles from the house his parents had raised him in. He took a part-time position teaching civics at the Community College of Vermont's Winooski campus. He has been teaching there ever since. He does not, in his civics classes, talk about his military service in any specific terms. He talks about it in general terms when the curriculum calls for it. He does not talk about Syria. He does not talk about the engagement of the 14th of December, 2017. He does not, by the account of his colleagues at the community college, talk about British Shogren. He does, however, write to her. He writes to her once a year. He writes on the 14th of December. He has written every 14th of December since 2018, which means that as of the writing of this script, he has written 8 times. The email comes from his personal account. It does not have a subject line. It does not have a greeting. It contains, in the body, 6 words, in 3 pairs of 2, in the same order every year. The email reads, For tanks. 11 minutes. Thanks. That is the entire email. She answers, every year, within 24 hours. Her reply also has no subject line. Her reply also has no greeting. Her reply contains, in the body, 1 word. The word is Roger. That is the entire reply. They have not spoken in person since the day Kallenbach was evacuated to Landstuhl on the 18th of December, 2017. They have not had a phone call. They have not been in the same room. They have exchanged, in the 8 years since the engagement, 48 words in 16 emails on 8 specific calendar days, which fall on the same calendar day every year, which is the calendar day on which she killed 4 tanks in 11 minutes and saved his life, and did not mention it. I asked her about the emails when I interviewed her at Fort Novosel in the spring of 2025. I asked her why she answers. I asked her why he writes. I asked her whether she thinks the correspondence is going to continue indefinitely. I asked her whether she thinks she will ever see him in person again. She thought about the questions for approximately 10 seconds. Then she said, "Mr. Holloway, I am going to answer the 4 questions in the order you asked them. I answer because he writes, and because answering is the correct response to a communication from a fellow officer that requires acknowledgement, and because the word I answer with is the word that acknowledges receipt without requiring me to say anything else, and because we have both decided, without ever discussing it, that the correct dimensions of this correspondence are the dimensions we have established. He writes because he needs to write. I do not know exactly what the need is. I have my guesses. I am not going to share them with you. The correspondence will continue until one of us stops writing, at which point the other one will know why, and the correspondence will end without further comment. I do not expect to see him in person again. I do not need to. He does not need to. The thing between us is the thing between us. It does not require additional input. It is operating correctly as it is. I asked her one more question. I asked her whether her father knew the story. She was quiet for a longer time before answering this one. She was quiet for approximately 20 seconds. Then she said, "My father knows the official version. He knows there was an engagement. He knows I flew it. He knows it resulted in the destruction of 4 tanks. He knows I was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor for the engagement, which I was, in a ceremony at Fort Hood in 2018, which he attended, and at which he stood in the front row with my mother and did not cry, because that is the arrangement. He does not know about the briefing on the 18th of June. He does not know about the patch. He does not know about the emails. I have not told him. I am not going to tell him. He has his arrangement. I have mine. The arrangements are similar. That is enough." I asked her, finally, whether she had ever told her father what she had read in his logbook on her 10th birthday. She said, "No, I have not. I will not." He gave me the logbook to look at because he wanted me to see it. He did not give it to me to discuss. The discussion is not the point. The seeing is the point. He understood, when he gave it to me, that I would see what he had written about me, and that I would understand it, and that I would not say anything to him about it, and that I would carry it forward in the way I conducted myself for the rest of my career. That is what I have done. He knows I have done it. He does not need me to confirm it. That is also the arrangement. I asked her, in the very last question, what the entry had said. She was quiet for a longer time than she had been quiet for any of the previous questions. Then she said, "Mr. Holloway, I am going to tell you what the entry said because I have decided, in the course of this interview, that the entry is part of the story you are telling, and that withholding it would be a failure of my obligation to the story. I am also going to ask you not to attribute the entry to my father by name. You can attribute it to a Marine Corps F-4 pilot who flew over Quang Tri in 1972. That is all I want you to attribute it to. Is that acceptable?" I said it was acceptable. She said, "The entry, on the date of my 10th birthday in 1996, in the section of the logbook that is normally reserved for flight notes, but that my father had been using for approximately 15 years by that point, for personal entries that he did not put anywhere else and that he did not show to anyone, including my mother, including me, read as follows." It read, "She has the face. She will be all right. She will fly. She will not need me to tell her how. She will know." That is the entry. That is what he wrote on my 10th birthday. I read it when I was 11. I have not read it since. I do not need to. I have it memorized. I have had it memorized for 33 years. It is the only thing my father has ever written about me that I know about. It is the only thing he has ever written about me that I needed to know about. The rest is silence. The silence is also part of the arrangement. Master Sergeant Edgardo Reyes was a scout sniper section leader with the 2nd Battalion, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, during Operation Just Cause in Panama in December of 1989. He served 3 subsequent combat tours, the last in Iraq in 2004. He retired from the Army in 2009. He died of pancreatic cancer in San Antonio, Texas, in March of 2019. I interviewed him in his home in October of 2018, for months before his death, for a different project that I did not, in the end, complete. He told me, in the course of that interview, a sentence that I wrote down in my notebook and that I have carried with me through every story I have told on this channel since, and that I have not, until tonight, used in a story. I am going to use it tonight. I am going to use it because it belongs in this story. I am going to use it because it is what British Sjogren's father, Lars Sjogren, understood about his own war, and what he understood about his daughter's war, and what he passed to her without ever saying it, in the form of a logbook entry on her 10th birthday, and in the form of a photograph on a hallway wall, and in the form of a single conversation on a back porch on the night before she shipped to Fort Jackson, and that she understood, and that she carried, and that she used. Reyes said to me, in his living room in San Antonio in October of 2018, with the recorder running and with his oxygen tank hissing quietly beside his chair, Mr. Holloway, the trick to a long career was not seeing what you saw. I do not mean that you closed your eyes. I mean that you saw the thing and you registered the thing, and then you put the thing into a particular place inside yourself where it did not come back out, and you did not visit the place. The men I served with who could do this had long careers. The men who could not, did not. I am not saying it was the right way to live. I am saying it was the way you lived, if you were going to keep living. I do not know what they are teaching now. I hope they are teaching something better. I do not think they are. I think they are teaching the same thing in different words. The words do not matter. The place inside you matters. You either build the place or you do not. If you build it, you are all right. If you do not, you are not. That is the entire trick. Lars Sjogren built the place. He did not visit it. He has carried it for 53 years. British Sjogren built the place. She does not visit it. She has carried it for 8 years and counting. Roman Kallenbach, by the evidence of the 8 emails he has written on the 14th of December every year for the last 8 years, did not build the place, or built it and visits it, or built it and cannot stop visiting it. The 6 words he writes every year are the words of a man who has not put the thing into a place where it does not come back out. The one word Britta writes back is the word of a person who is acknowledging, with the minimum required acknowledgement, that she understands what he is doing, and that she is willing to participate in his correspondence to the extent that participation requires nothing of her except the word Roger, and that she is not going to require him to stop. Because requiring him to stop would be a failure of the obligation she feels to him, which is the obligation of a pilot to a fellow pilot who once told her, in front of 14 of her peers, that she did not belong in the cockpit, and who later, in front of most of the same peers, told her that he had been wrong, and who has, every year since, sent her 6 words on the 14th of December. She does not believe he owes her anything. She has said this to me directly. She believes that the combat action badge he gave her on the morning of the 15th of December, 2017, settled whatever account there was to settle between them, and that everything since has been correspondence between 2 officers who served together in a particular place at a particular time and who understand, without discussing it, that the correspondence is the appropriate form of the continuing relationship. He, by the evidence of the correspondence, may believe something different. I do not know what he believes. I have not interviewed him for this story. I called him in February of 2025, and I introduced myself, and I told him what I was working on, and I asked him if he would speak with me. He was polite. He was direct. He said, "Mr. Holloway, I appreciate the call. I am not going to speak with you for this story. The story is hers. If she has spoken with you, then you have what you need. If she has not, then I am not going to be the one who fills in the gaps. Please give my regards to whoever you speak with at Fort Novosel. Thank you for your work. Goodbye." He hung up. I did not call back. She had spoken with me. I had what I needed. CW for British Shogren is 40 years old. She is an instructor pilot at the United States Army Aviation Center of Excellence at Fort Novosel, Alabama, which was, until April of 2023, called Fort Rucker, and which was renamed in honor of Chief Warrant Officer for Michael J. Novosel Sr., who flew dust-off medevac missions in Vietnam and who was awarded the Medal of Honor for an extraction of 29 South Vietnamese soldiers under fire on the 2nd of October, 1969. She is, by the assessment of the senior instructor at the AH-64 schoolhouse, the most technically proficient Apache instructor pilot currently assigned to the schoolhouse, and one of the 3 or 4 most technically proficient Apache pilots in the United States Army at any rank or position, and the only instructor pilot at the schoolhouse who is qualified to teach the full MTP solo combat employment block to graduating warrant officer candidates, which is a block of instruction that did not exist in the AH-64 curriculum prior to 2019, and that was added to the curriculum in 2019 specifically because of the engagement she flew on the 14th of December, 2017, and that is taught at the schoolhouse using the gun camera footage from tail number 87-0426 as the primary case study, and that is taught by her, by name, by assignment, by the deliberate choice of the schoolhouse leadership, because the schoolhouse leadership has decided correctly that the pilot who flew the engagement is the pilot who should teach the engagement. She does not, in the classroom, identify herself as the pilot in the footage. The students figure it out, on average, by the second hour of the second day of the block. She does not confirm it when they ask. She does not deny it when they ask. She redirects the question, every time, to the technical content of the footage, which is the content the block is built around, and which is the content the students are at the schoolhouse to learn. She has been teaching the block since 2022. She has taught it to approximately 340 graduating warrant officer candidates. The block is, by the internal assessment of the schoolhouse, the most heavily evaluated single block of instruction in the AH-64 curriculum, and the block with the highest student-reported impact on confidence in solo emergency employment. She lives in a small one-story house in Enterprise, Alabama, for miles from the schoolhouse. She is unmarried. She does not have children. She has a dog, a 6-year-old yellow Labrador named Skog, which is the Swedish word for forest, and which was her father's suggestion when she got the dog as an 8-week-old puppy in 2019. She drives a 2014 Toyota Tacoma. She runs 4 miles every morning before work. She reads, in the evenings, mostly history and mostly memoir, and she has, on her bedside table, at the time of my visit in the spring of 2025, a copy of a book called The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, which she told me she has read approximately 12 times since she was 19, and which she rereads, by her own admission, approximately every other year, and which she does not require to mean anything in particular to her in order to keep reading it. Her father is 74. He is in good health. He still lives in the house in Vermont. He still has the photograph in the hallway. He still has the logbook, which he keeps, now, in a fireproof safe in the basement of the house, along with his discharge papers, his flight records, and a small black and white photograph of his Rio from VMFA 115, taken at NASQB Point in the Philippines in February of 1972, and which is the only photograph of his squadron mates he kept after he separated. He visits her in Alabama twice a year, in the spring and in the fall. She visits him in Vermont once a year, in late July, around the anniversary of the day in 1972 when his Rio did not come back from the flight over Quang Tri. They do not, on these visits, discuss either of their wars. They walk in the woods behind the house. They drink coffee on the back porch. They have, on each visit, exactly one conversation about something neither of them has said before, which is, by the unstated agreement they reached at some point in the late 1990s, the maximum acceptable density of disclosure for a visit between them. The rest is silence. The silence is comfortable. The silence is the form of the relationship. The silence is the relationship. She told me, in the last hour of the last day of my visit in the spring of 2025, sitting at her kitchen table in Enterprise with the dog asleep under the table and the late afternoon Alabama sun coming in through the window over the sink, Mr. Holloway, I am going to tell you the thing I have not told you yet. I am going to tell you it because we have been talking for 3 days, and because you have not asked me the question that would let me tell you it, and because I have decided, in the course of these 3 days, that I want you to have it for the story. The thing is this. On the morning of the 14th of December, 2017, before the briefing, before the alert went out, before any of the things happened that the rest of the story is about, I sat in this same configuration that I am sitting in now, except in a folding chair instead of a kitchen chair, in the dining facility at Al-Tanf, with a cup of coffee and a notebook open in front of me, and I wrote. On the inside back cover of the notebook my father had given me in 2007, a sentence I had not written before, and that I have not written since. The sentence was, "Today is the day." That was the entire sentence. I did not know what I meant by it when I wrote it. I wrote it at 06:45 local on the 14th of December, 2017, which was 3 hours and 53 minutes before Captain Kallenbach took off from Al-Tanf on the mission he did not come back from, and 3 hours and 55 minutes before the call from the SDF ground element came in, and 4 hours and 47 minutes before CW3 Devereaux turned around in the operations tent and looked at me and asked me if I would take an aircraft up. I do not know why I wrote it. I am not telling you I had a premonition. I am telling you I wrote the sentence. I am telling you the sentence was there in the notebook when I came back to the Connex that night and lay on the cot for 3 hours and looked at the ceiling. I am telling you the sentence is still in the notebook. The notebook is in the drawer in my office at Fort Novosel. The sentence is on the inside back cover. I have not added to it. I have not crossed it out. It is what it is. I do not know what it means. I have stopped trying to know. I am telling you it because you are the person who is telling the story, and because the story, if it is going to be told properly, has to contain the sentence. Even if the sentence does not explain itself, and even if I cannot explain it, and even if my father, if he ever read it, would not be able to explain it either. That is the thing. That is the last thing. That is all I have for you. I asked her if I could quote the sentence. She said, "Yes, you can quote the sentence. You can quote it the way I just said it. Today is the day." For words. No punctuation in the original. I did not put a period on it. I am not going to put a period on it now. I asked her if she wanted to add anything else before I closed the recorder. She said, "No, that is enough. Close the recorder." I closed the recorder. This has been on the record. My name is Beauregard Holloway. The story you have heard tonight is the story of CW4 Britta Sjogren, of her father Lars Sjogren, of CW4 Roman Kallenbach, of CW3 Marcia Ingebrigtsen, of CW3 Lacey Vanover, of CW2 Imelda Costa Reyes, of Staff Sergeant Joaquin Estrelis, of Staff Sergeant Rennie Toussaint, of CW3 Devereaux, of Major Hollister Crane, of Sergeant First Class Webb Pemberton, and of Master Sergeant Edgardo Reyes, who died in March of 2019 and whose sentence about the place inside yourself I have carried in my notebook for 6 years and have used, tonight, for the first time, in the story it belonged in. The story is true. The names, with the 2 exceptions I noted in the body, are real. The dates are real. The grid coordinates have been omitted for operational security reasons, but are real. The gun camera footage from tail number 87-0426 is real and is, with appropriate redactions, in the public domain as part of the Army's MTP Solo Combat Employment Training Package, which any current Army aviator with the appropriate clearances can request through the schoolhouse at Fort Novosel. The 4 words on the inside back cover of the green notebook are real. The 6 words in the email Roman Kallenbach sends every 14th of December are real. The 1 word Britta Sjogren writes back is real. The 4 words Lars Sjogren wrote under the photograph in the hallway of the house in Vermont in 1981 are real, and I am going to give them to you now, at the end of the story, instead of in the middle of it, where I would have given them to you if I had been telling the story in the order it happened instead of in the order it needed to be told. The 4 words Lars Sjogren wrote under the photograph in his own handwriting on a piece of masking tape on the bottom edge of the frame in 1981, when his daughter was 4 years old, were, "He did not come back." That is the caption. That is the photograph. That is the hallway. That is the house. That is the father. That is the daughter. That is the story. Good night.